Now let's go for the second session of moral reasoning, key ethical theories introduction. So welcome back everyone and let's go for it. Now we're ready to explore the major frameworks philosophers have developed for moral reasoning. Throughout history, philosophers have developed comprehensive frameworks for approaching moral questionings. These ethical theories provide structured ways to think about right and wrong actions. Think of ethical stories as different lenses through which we can examine moral reasoning. Just as you might analyze a literary text through different critical lens, feminist, Marxist, psychoanalytic, you can analyze ethical dilemmas through different moral frameworks. While these theories sometimes reach different conclusions about what's right, each offers valuable insights into moral reasoning. No single theory has one universal acceptance, which tells us something important. Moral life is complex through enough that multiple frameworks capture different aspects of ethical truth. Understanding these theories will help you in several ways. First, you'll be able to identify which framework characters or authors are using in literary texts. Second, you'll be able to construct sophisticated moral arguments in your own writing. Third, you'll have systematic ways to think through ethical dilemmas rather than relying only on intuition. Let's examine the major ethical theories, understanding both the insights and their limitations. Consequentialism. The first major framework is consequentialism. Consequentalist theories judge the rightness of actions based solely on their outcomes or consequences. According to this view, the right action is the one that produces the best overall results, regardless of intentions or methods. The ends, at least potentially, can justify the means. The key insight of consequentialism is this: moral actions should make the world better, not worse. This seems intuitive, doesn't it? If we are trying to act ethically, shouldn't we be trying to produce good outcomes? Consequentalists argue that focusing on on anything other than outcomes is ultimately arbitrary. What matters morally is the actual impact of our actions on well-being, happiness, or other valued outcomes, not our intentions, not the process we follow, not adherence to rules. Consider an example. Imagine you must decide whether to lie protect someone from serious harm. A consequentialist would evaluate this based purely on outcomes. If lying will prevent serious harm and produce better overall consequences than telling the truth, then lying is the right action, even though we generally consider lying wrong. Notable proponents include John Stuart Mill and Peter Singer, both philosophers who have argued that we should focus on producing the best consequences for all affected beings. The quote on your slide is from Leon Trotsky. The end may justify the means as long as there is something that justifies the end. This captures the consequentialist idea that we must evaluate both the means, the action itself, and the end, the goal, by their consequences. If the goal is genuinely good and the means effectively achieve it without worse consequence, the action may be justified. Utilitarianism. A specific form of consequentialism is utilitarianism, which holds that the right action maximizes over all happiness or well-being and maximizes suffering. Utilitarianism is the most influential form of consequentialism. The moral worth of an action is determined by its contribution to overall happiness or pleasure. We should choose actions that produce the greatest good for the greatest number. The key insight, the interests of all being capable of suffering should count equally. This is a radically egalitarian principle. It doesn't matter if someone is rich or poor, powerful or powerless, near or far, human or animal. If they can experience well-being or suffering, their interests count equally in our moral calculations. Notable proponents include Jeremy Bentham, who founded modern utilitarianism, and John Stuart Mill, who defined and defended it. The quote on your slide is from Bentham: "The greatest happiness of the greatest number is the foundation of moral and legislation." This encapsulates the utilitarian principle perfectly. Utilitarianism has several appealing features. It's egalitarian. Everyone counts equally. It's focused on reducing suffering, which seems morally important. It provides clear decision procedures. It calculates which action produces the most happiness. But utilitarianism also faces challenges. How do we measure and compare different people's happiness? What if maximizing overall happiness requires seriously harming some individuals? Does it leave room for a special relationship and the communities? These are questions utilitarians must address. In literature, utilitarian thinking often appears when characters must make difficult trade-offs. The trolley problem sacrifice one to save five. It's utilitarian dilemma. Characters who argue the needs of the many over the needs of the few are invoking utilitarian reasoning. Deontology. Our next major framework is deontology or or duty-based ethics. This approach focuses on the inherent rightness or wrongness of actions themselves rather than their consequences. Deontology emphasizes following moral rules, fulfilling duties, and respecting rights, regardless of outcome. Some actions are simply right or wrong in themselves, independent of their consequences. The key insight: some actions are intrinsically wrong, regardless of their consequences. For deontologists, certain moral lines simply cannot be crossed, even if doing so would produce good outcomes. The most famous deontologist is Immanuel Kant, and this principle is quoted on your slide. Act only according to that maximum whereby you can at the same time well that it should become a universal law. Let me unpack this dense but powerful idea. Kant is saying before you act, consider the principle maximum behind your action. Then ask yourself, could I rationally well that everyone follows this principle all this time? For example, if you're considering lying to get out of trouble, the maximum might um, the maxim might be lie when it's convenient, but could you will this as a universal law? If everyone lied when convenient, communication could break down and lying would become pointless. No one would believe anyone. So by Kant's test, lying fails as a moral principle. This connects directly to our consistency principle. You should only act according to principles you'd accept everyone following. Other The ontological thinkers like W.D. Ross argued for multiple prima facie duties of fidelity, gratitude, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, and self-improvement. When these duties conflict, we must use judgment to determine which takes precedence. The ontology captures important moral intuitions. It explains why we think some things are wrong even if they produce good consequences, like torturing an innocent person to extract information and the might and that might save others. It respects individual rights and dignity rather than treating people merely as means to collective happiness. However, the ontology faces its own challenges. How do we know which duties are genuine? What do we do when duties conflict? Can it be too rigid, demanding we follow rules even when consequences are catastrophic? Virtue ethics. Our third major framework is virtue ethics rather than focusing on rules or consequences. Virtue ethics emphasizes the development of virtuous character. Virtue ethics asks not what should I do, but what kind of person should I be. The right action is what a virtuous person would do in the circumstances. This represents a fundamentally different approach to ethics. Instead of first determining right action and then doing it, virtue ethics says we should cultivate good character and right action will flow naturally from that character. The key inside ethics is about developing moral character, not just following rules. Being a good person is more fundamental than doing good things, or rather, doing good things follows from being a good person. The founder of virtue ethics is Aristotle, and his insight is captured in the quote: "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence then is not an act but a habit. This means that virtues are cultivated through practice. You become courageous by repeatedly acting courageously. You become honest by habitually telling the truth. You become compassionate by regularly responding to others' suffering with care. Aristotle identified numerous virtues: courage, temperance, justice, prudence, generosity, friendliness, truthfulness, and more. Importantly, he argued that virtues are often golden means between extremes. Courage is the mean between cowardice and recklessness. Generosity is the mean between stinginess and wastefulness. Modern virtue ethist Al as dear McIntyre has received this tradition, arguing that virtues make sense within particular social practices and traditions. Visual ethics has distinctive strengths. It emphasizes character development and the unity of the moral life. It recognizes the importance of emotions and the moral perception, not just the rational calculations. It accounts for moral wisdom and the role of exemplars, learning ethics by emulating virtuous people. For literature students, virtue ethics is particularly relevant. Characters are often defined by their virtues and vices. We admire ethics, finish, courage, and integrity, despise egos, malice, and treachery. Character development often means moral development, characters growing in virtue or declining into vice. However, virtue ethics faces questions too. Which virtues are genuine? Do virtues differ across cultures? How do we resolve conflicts between virtues? Can it provide a specific action guidance in different dilemmas? Applying these theories to literature. For English students, these theories provide analytical lens for examining literary characters and their choices. Let's practice applying these frameworks with some examples. Is Hamlet's hesitation a failure or virtue? From a virtuous ethics perspectives, we might analyze Hamlet's character. Does he lack the virtue of courage or distinctiveness, or is this his hesitation actually prudence? Thinking carefully before acting, Aristotle would say virtue requires acting at the right time in the right way for the right reasons. Is Hamlet's delay a failure to find this mean, or is it thoughtful deliberation? Are Romeo and Juliet's actions justified by their consequences? Consequentalists would ask, did their actions produce the best overall outcomes? Their love brought temporarily happiness but ultimately led to multiple deaths. However, a utilitarian might argue we should consider not actual consequences but expected consequences based on what they know. They couldn't have predicted the tragic ending. Does Jane Eyre follow universal moral principles? The ontologist would examine whether Jane acts according to principles she could well as universal laws when she refuses to become Rochester's mistress despite loving him. She is following the principle that we shouldn't participate in adultery. This is a principle she she would well universally she wouldn't want others to enter such relationships. Either her action respects moral duty over personal happiness. By applying these frameworks, we gain deeper insights into literary ethics and human motivation. We move beyond simple judgments. This character is good, that one is bad, to analysis of the moral reasoning guiding characters' choices. Moreover, we often find that literary works themselves engage with these frameworks. Authors construct scenarios that test different ethical approaches, showing their strengths and limitations. Great literature rarely endorses one framework simplistically, but explores the tensions between different valid moral considerations. Then let's go to one example, Jane dilemmas. Scenario A. To follow how moral reasoning work in practice, let's examine a classical ethical comparison that demonstrates the importance of context and motivation in ethical judgment. In Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, Jane Valjean steals bread to feed his starving sister and her children. Despite the theft being a relatively minor crime, he is sentenced to 5 years of hard labor, later extended to 19 years due to escape attempts. The scenario raises profound ethical questions that we can analyze using our frameworks. From a consequentialist perspective, we would evaluate the consequences. Val Jane's theft prevented serious harm. Has family members starving at relatively small cost to the wealthy baker. The theft produced better overall consequences that than not stealing. By utilitarian calculation, it seems justified. From um, a deontological perspective, we'd ask about universal principles. Can we well as a universal law that people may steal when their families are starving? This is more uh, complicated than arbitrary theft. We might formulate a principle like in situations of dire need when no legitimate alternatives exist, talking what's necessary for universal is permissible. This seems potentially universalizable. From a virtue ethics perspective, we'd consider Valgerian character and the motivations. He wasn't stealing from greed, malice, or selfishness, vices that corrupt characters. He was motivated by care for his family, a virtue. His action reflected compassion through perhaps lack of law abidingness. Hogg's novel clearly sympathizes with Valjean and critiques the harsh punishment as unjust. The story suggested that the legal system failed by not recognizing morally relevant differences between types of theft and by applying rules without considering context. This raises important questions about the relationship between law and morality. Are all illegal acts more immoral? Should circumstances affect moral judgment? Then let's go to Uh, example, malicious theft scenario B. Now contrast Bal Jane with someone who steals valuable items from a neighbor purely out of spite or jealousy, and despite having no material need. The person takes pleasure in the neighbor's distress and the act itself. The scenario involves the same act, theft, but with radically different context and motivation. From a consequentialist perspective, this theft reduces only navigate consequences. The victim experiences loss and distress. The thief gains nothing of genuine value, just temporary satisfaction from another's pain. There is no benefit that outweighs the harm by utilitarian calculations. This is clearly wrong. From a deontological perspective, this violates the categorical imperative even more clearly than Valjean's theft. Could we, well, as universal law, people may steal from others when motivated by spite? Obviously not. This would create a world where property rights meant nothing and malice governed behavior. No national person could well such a principle. From a virtue ethics perspective, this theft reflects serious character flaws, malice, envy, cruelty, injustice. It's not just a wrong action, but an expression of various character. The thief is becoming a worse person through such acts. Now, here is the crucial question: what the morally relevant difference between Valjean's theft and this malicious theft? Both involve taking someone's property without permission, but clearly they're morally different. The relevant differences include motivation, necessity versus malice, consequences, preventing serious from versus causing gratuitous harm, character comparison versus cruelty, circumstances, dire need versus material comfort. This comparison illustrates why the relevant differences principle is essential. Not all thefts are equally wrong because context, motivation, and circumstances create morally relevant distinctions. This is why good moral reasoning requires nuance. We cannot simply say theft is always wrong or theft is acceptable when motivated by need. We must think carefully about which factors make actions more or less wrong and how different considerations should be weighted. Then moral reasoning, literature and texts introduction. Now let's explore more deeply how literature serves as a unique space for developing moral reasoning skills. Literature serves as an unparalleled laboratory for ethical exploration. Through narrative, we encounter complex moral situations and witness the consequences of character choices without personal risk. Think about it. In real life, you cannot experiment with moral decisions without real consequences. If you make a wrong choice, people are harmed, relationships are damaged, your character may be dimensioned. There is no auto button in life. But literature provides a safe space for ethical experimentation. You can uh, experience characters making different and difficult choices. See how things turn out. Consider what you would have done. Analyze what went wrong or right, all without actual risk. This makes literature an ideal medium for developing moral reasoning skills. You can encounter ethical complexity, practice moral judgment, and refine your thinking through exposure to countless scenarios and perspectives. Moreover, literature engages both our emotional and rational faculties. Unlike abstract philosophical debates, stories make us care about characters and their dilemmas. This emotional engage combined with intellectual analysis creates powerful moral learning. Exploring moral complexity. Great literature rarely represents simplistic moral landscapes. Instead, it introduces us to ethical gray areas, competing values, and the different and difficult choices where no option is without cost. In simple moral narratives like fairy tales or propaganda, characters are clearly good or evil. Choices are obvious and the good triumphs easily. But great literature recognizes that real moral life is complex. Characters we sympathize with do terrible things, choices that seem right lead to disaster, good intentions produce harm. By wrestling with their complexities alongside characters, the readers develop more moral understanding. Let me give you some examples. Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment explores whether an extraordinary man might be justified in committing murder for greater or for greater good. The protagonist uh, Raskolnikov murders a pawnbroker, reasoning that she's a worthless person exploiting others and that he can use her money for good purposes. The novel examines consequentialist reasoning and shows its psychological and moral inadequacy, but doesn't simply dismiss the questions raised. Morrison's Beloved presented the aftermath of an enslaved mother killing her child to prevent the child being returned to slavery. Can such an act be understood morally? How do we judge desperate actions taken in impossible circumstances created by profound injustice? Shakespeare's King Lear explores family obligations, political responsibility, and the consequences of pride and poor judgment. No character is simply good or bad. Everyone makes tragic errors. The outcomes are devastating. The play forces us to grapple with moral complexity without easy answers. These works do not tell us what to think, they make us think. They present ethical dilemmas in all their difficulty and leave us to wrestle with them. Cultivating empathy. Reading allows us to temporarily inhabit other perspectives and experience the world through different eyes. This imaginative empathy is crucial for moral reasoning, which requires understanding how our actions affect others. One of the most important moral capacities is empathy, the ability to understand and share others' feelings, to see the world from their perspective. But our natural empathy has limits. We lost easily emphasis with people similar to us, people we know personally, people we can see directly. Literature extends our moral imagination beyond our immediate experience. Through reading, you can experience life as someone of different race, gender, class, historical period, or culture. You can understand the perspective of someone whose experience and values differ radically from your own. This is why literature is morally valuable in ways that abstract philosophy isn't. Philosophy can tell you that you should consider others' perspectives. Literature makes you actually do it. You cannot engage deeply with a novel without trying to understand the characters' viewpoints, even when they are very different from your own. Consider To Kill a Mockingbird reading from Scout's perspective. We experience both childhood innocence and growing awareness of racial injustice. We understand Atticus' moral courage and the community's prejudice. We've invited to emphasize with Tom Robinson and see the injustice through his eyes. The novel doesn't just argue against racism, it makes us feel it's wrong through empathetic understanding. Um, Hosseini's The Kite Runner takes us into Afghan culture and experience, helping readers understand a world they may know little about. Through Amir's story, we experience guilt, culture, dislocation, and the possibility of redemption. Bolter's Kindred uses science fiction to make a contemporary black women experience slavery directly, and readers experience it through her. This creates a visceral understanding of historical injustice that historical accounts alone may not produce. Through such reading, our circle of moral concern expands. People who were abstract or distant become real. Their suffering becomes something we can feel, not just intellectually knowledge. Witnessing moral consequences, literature compresses time, allowing readers to observe the full consequences of moral choices that might take years to unfold in real life. This telescoping of cause and effect highlights the long term implications of ethical decisions and values in real life. The consequences of our choices often take years of decades to fully manifest. A decision made in youth affects the trajectory of a life. A moral compromise seems insignificant at the time but shapes character over years. We rarely get to see the full arc of cause and effect. Literature solves this problem. A novel can show you a character's choice in chapter 1 and its consequences in chapter 30. You see how small moral decisions compound over time, how characters develop or degrades, how choices ripple toward affecting communities and the future generations. Shelley's Frankenstein shows the long-term consequences of Victor Frankenstein ethical failures, his initial decisions to create life without considering his responsibilities, his abandonment of his creation, his refusal to take accountability. Each choice compounds in tragedy. The novel traces how these moral failures lead to the destruction to everyone Victor loves, we witness the full catastrophic arc that Victor himself couldn't foresee. Steinbeck's The Graves of Wrath showed the consequences of economic exploitation and the social indifference across time. We see how systematic injustice, treating people as disposable labor rather than human being with dignity, destroys families, communities, and lives. The novel makes visible consequences that might be invisible to those benefiting from unjust systems. Achibis Things Fall Apart traces how cultural collision and colonialism destroy society over time. We witness the gradual erosion of Igbo culture, the tragic fate of Ko, and the broader devastation of colonization. The novel shows consequences that unfold across generations. The ability to witness long-term consequences strengthens our moral reasoning. It helps us think beyond immediate outcomes to consider how our actions shape the future. It illustrates how character is destiny, how the kind of person we become through our choices determines the trajectory of our lives. In moral philosophy, this connects to virtuous ethics, emphasis on character formation. Our choices do not just produce isolated outcomes, they shape who we are becoming. Literature makes this visible in ways that abstract argument cannot. We will continue, inshallah, the last and the final session next time. And until next time, tata for now. Thank you so much for watching me teaching you one of the most important subjects in year one, moral reasoning. Until next time, tata for now.